Birthdays are, huh, Lady B?
Yes.
You did. We had a great talk last night about the about Iowa when we were at Let's Talk About It with Santita Jackson and friends, and our interns Cortez and Mateo came over, and you did too. I couldn't believe
Yes.
it. Um, Did we not have a good time?
Have great
Great
time.
time. Did you, Mateo? You had a great time. I can't believe
I
it. You're
enjoy
so hard to
listening.
please. I love it. Learned a lot, huh?
Yep,
Just talking
definitely.
about politics. It's important for you to understand the history in this political process. And now we have, well, what one could just say is hashtag hot mess.
Yes.
You have an app that was introduced to the Iowa Democratic Party 2 months ago, something that they never tested statewide. That has thrown everything all the way off. Now, Iowa takes a lot of pride in being the first in the nation. And that gives whoever wins momentum, or an unexpected number two, that can give them momentum too. Think about it this way: the person who actually won last night was denied the opportunity to give that speech and to have that replayed today over and over and over and over again. And the door was open for President Trump to um, to make light of this dilemma. I
Hmm.
mean, people have been preparing for Iowa 2020 for 4 years, and now we don't have any results. So we are fortunate to have Chris McGreal from The Guardian, who we had on yesterday, who is still there. I can't wait to find out from him as we go through these headlines, just a few of them, what happened. So call me at 773 WCPT, 773 before we get to our other guest, Reverend Frank Watkins. I really can't wait to hear from Reverend Frank Watkins.
Right.
Um, and Latasha Brown from Black Voters Matter. She's been a Harvard Fellow, so she's been there, but she's registering people to vote right now. And Charles Ellison, of course, from WURD in Philadelphia, as we get to that critical state. This is a harbinger. We've been talking about the
Hmm.
vote and these
Right.
new systems that they keep trying out, voting on the smartphone. I said that's a dumb idea. I told you that. Didn't I
You
say that
did.
last week?
You. s-
I'm, I'm no oracle. I'm just saying, keep it simple, everybody, and have a system in which you intend for everybody to vote and for everyone's vote to count. I'm not so sure that that is where we are. And I really can't wait to hear from Chris McGreal and from Reverend Frank Watkins, because a lot of the rules that have been changed were changed because of the Jackson campaign, this insurgent campaign that the Democratic Party and, quite frankly, American politics, they were not ready for it.
Hmm.
And so they had to do a mad scramble. Number one, that campaign uncovered just how undemocratic the process is. So I don't want to belabor that, because I want to hear from these experts, because Chris McGreal of The Guardian, the author of American Overdose, you got to get that book. It's about the American opioid crisis. Um, I just, Lady B, you didn't even know, you missed that, because
Yes, I
we were out
did.
really late last night, right?
Yes.
Oh, would you get in that microphone? Oh my
I
gosh.
did miss it, and when I walked in and you was telling me, I'm like, what?
Yeah, we have no winner. Well, there's a winner. We just don't know who it
Who
is.
it is, right?
Mm.
And
Wow, wow,
and
wow. So everybody, well, that is the story of the day. Everyone wants to know who won Iowa. Who won Iowa? And more than that, what went wrong? Healthcare, according to a CNN poll, was the top issue for Iowa caucus goers. But then I was listening to another report that said that electability was the number one issue. What do you think is
oh,
the number one issue in this campaign? Is it electability, or is it health care? We'll talk about that, everybody, today. Well, the headline from The Guardian, thank you, Chris McGreal: Democratic race starts disastrously as inconsistencies delay the Iowa results. According to uh, this report from Lauren Gambino, the Democratic presidential primary contest has gotten off to a disastrous start
oh,
after results from the highly anticipated Iowa Democratic caucuses were dramatically delayed, are dramatically delayed due to inconsistencies in the reporting of the data. And we just heard about the Des Moines Register, which is the largest newspaper in the state. The largest newspaper in the state. They couldn't even get this critical poll out because of a mistake that they made. What is going on there? The app used to tabulate the votes. Well, it turns out it is said to have been inadequately tested, according to anonymous sources. This was an app that was given to the Iowa Democratic Party 2 months ago. The name of the company that makes the app was hidden from them. They never tested it statewide. Are you kidding me? All of this is from the New York Times. Wow. So I wonder if we're going to find out today who won. What do you think? And of course, this is giving way to so called conspiracy theories. Well, I don't know if it's conspiracy, but something about this is not right. So let's talk about that. And of course, tonight, the president is going to be giving his State of the Union address. And he'll be the first president since Bill Clinton to give a State of the Union address while he's under the specter of impeachment. Okay, we expect to have him exonerated, but still, that is noteworthy, everybody. And his campaign, the Trump campaign, has been jubilant, according to this Guardian headline, as Democrats' big night implodes. It's a meltdown, everybody. It's a meltdown. What do you think about that? What do you think about that? Well, let's just get right to it, everybody. The Blackhawks will be playing the Wild tonight. The Dow was up yesterday. It closed up 143 points. The Nasdaq closed up 122 points. The S&P closed up 23 points, and we're expecting a high of 36 degrees. It's a little crisp outside, about 29 degrees, but it feels good. All right, everybody. Chris McGreal from The Guardian. You are in Iowa right now. What happened?
Indeed. What a way to run an election. Well, I'm up in northeastern Iowa, and certainly the parts of the state I was in, everything went smoothly until it came to getting the results in. And that's when I first kind of got a glimpse, there's a problem here, because it seems that at least some people didn't even try and use the app. They felt that it was too complicated. A lot of people running the show around here are perhaps older, not instinctively likely to go to their phones, and there was a phone number on the envelope they had in which they put all the results, and they started calling in. And he quickly told me that actually, wow, we've got really long waits, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and that started going up. And when I left, some of the local high school here, for instance, they were still sitting there well over an hour trying to get the results in, some of the precinct officials. So you've got a real sense that it just wasn't working. They just couldn't get these results in, and they couldn't go anywhere until they had.
Do you know anything about this company that made the app? I was reading this New York Times article that said that this company, ironically called Shadow, that they wanted to remain, that the Democratic National Committee wanted to keep them a secret. I mean, how could...
I don't know anything about them, and you do have to wonder, why do they want to keep them a secret? And if you were confident in your app being used for these purposes, you'd think they'd want to trumpet it, but perhaps you can understand why not. I mean, I do think that obviously the app is a big problem, but I got a little bit of a sense of as the officials were telling people how the voting was going to be handled, it was different this time. And you could tell that people felt, this is more complicated. And what do I do now? And when do I write this on the ballot? And I mustn't write the second name until I'm told. And so there was a sense that this had been made perhaps overly complicated in a sense. It worked fine in the sense that the precinct I was in, it went through the process. But you could tell that people didn't kind of feel it instinctively, that it was instinctively a kind of logical system to them. And then when, of course, it came to putting in the results, they were filling out the forms and they had to send in 3 different results. It wasn't as before, where you just sent in the one result and that was tallied up. You had these 3 different results, which was effectively the first round of voting, the second round of voting, and then the number of state delegates. And so that complicated matters as well, because there's always this risk that the numbers get jumbled up or they don't add up when you're sending in 3 sets of numbers, and then a person on the other end might get more confused, and it just seemed overly complicated. And then on top of that, you had the app.
What was lost last night by not having a winner? I mean, I said, as we were coming into this segment with you, that, you had a winner who was denied the opportunity to give a speech and to have that speech played this morning. Uh, what was lost?
Well, I think that's exactly it. The momentum for the winner, and particularly if it was an outsider, if it was Pete Buttigieg, as he claims, although I would wonder if that were the case based on the results around here. I think it might be Sanders and then Buttigieg, but certainly he lost out big time because whatever happens, he's a contender, and that was his moment to say, I am here and I'm here to stay. And then I would imagine that Sanders lost out if he did win very big time. Of course, Joe Biden gave himself, if he did as badly as it seems, and one of the precincts I was in, amazingly, Joe Biden didn't get a single vote, which is really quite interesting. And another precinct that had several hundred voters, he only got about 5% of the vote. So he was doing really quite badly in parts. And so I imagine he certainly benefits from this. But of course, the bigger picture is that the Democratic Party loses out. This was their moment to kind of shine, compare themselves to the president, to put it out there as this is the brand new start. This is the alternative. This is who is going to lead us to take on Donald Trump. And now they're sitting in a position where the president can turn around and say they want the government to run healthcare and they can't even run an election.
Hmm. So where do we go from here? I mean, do you think that, do you know if this app is being used in any other state? And just we've been talking for the past few days about how vulnerable and how fragile our electoral system is. I mean, you had Michigan officials and now officials all over the country are saying, look, we're expecting a record turnout, and from what I can understand, you had a very robust turnout up in Iowa yesterday, and we're not ready to handle it. What do you see down the road?
Well, if anybody else is using the app, I imagine they're very rapidly losing it, and so I can't imagine that that's going to feature again. I mean, what you do see here, quite interestingly, is that they've actually gone back to effectively the old-fashioned way, which is they're taking photographs of the forms and sending them, and then tallying them up. Which is, they should have just stuck with the old fax machines, right? That way you can see the numbers the other end. Everything's very clear. But going down the road, I don't know what happens now. I mean, obviously the system needs simplifying, but it does raise questions about the nature of caucuses and how you run them and this counting method. And as you will have heard, there are plenty of people now raising questions about, again, and legitimately, about whether Iowa should even hold this position. They're only at the third position of being able to, present the front runners to the nation, and they can't even get that right. So I imagine there's going to be a lot of questions about Iowa's position in all of this. But also, perhaps these things, given the way the technology now works and all the rest, maybe rather than states running them, maybe this does need to be something that there's for the Democratic Party, at least a national kind of input in the way that this is all run. And it does seem absurd that you have this app that was untested, apparently only put together in the past couple of months. We don't know who's even running it. Which again raises questions. Well, what is this company? Who owns it? Are they vulnerable in this days of, Russian hacking and Cambridge Analytica and manipulation and everything that we know that goes on? Who's using this data? All of that stuff. And I think the lack of transparency perhaps will also be a big focus of what happens as we go forward.
I want to bring on with you Reverend Frank Watkins. He uh, has worked with Reverend Jesse Jackson for more than 50 years, and he was one of the architects of the 84 and 88 campaigns, and uh, he had to interact with the state officials about changing the rules. So many of the rules that under which the Democratic Party and this process now functions were instituted by negotiations that were led by Reverend Jackson, and of course, Reverend Frank Watkins was head of that team. Reverend Watkins, when you hear about what happened last night in Iowa, what was your first reaction?
Well, just watching the system function last night on television, I actually wrote to somebody that, or gave someone a text that this is insane.
Mm.
This process is just clearly insane. Uh, First of all, the Iowa caucus is unique to other caucuses. A lot of other caucuses don't work this way. Uh, you know, because we have a states' rights and local control voting system with few national standards, uh, each state can design their election the way they choose to design it. But I do have a surprise for you. You remember John Norris from?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Yeah, he had some inside information, and he told me that Santita Jackson won the write-in campaign and will probably be the Democratic nominee coming out of Iowa with momentum.
Oh, stop it. Please don't do that to me. Don't do that to me.
It's a crazy system, and the gentleman from The Guardian, he really covered virtually everything that should be covered, and said everything that, he had it right on, hit it right on the head.
Well, let me ask you this, Chris. Well, oh, yes.
It just denies the person who did win. But even that, because of the way the system was operating, or this year was unique. As he indicated, there are actually three results that are turned in. When you go in and you first caucus with the person that is your first choice, well, they count up all those votes, and that was going to be one number that they gave you, the person who got the most votes on the first ballot. Then, if you weren't viable, which had to do with the Jackson rule, that if you didn't make 15%, if you didn't have 15% of the total votes, you were considered non-viable, and you had to choose another group or go home. If you were so committed to your candidate that you didn't want to move to another group, then you literally went home. Give you the score of the second round of voting. And then that had to be translated into delegates. So that would be a third number. So literally, you could have had three winners, or maybe even 5 or 6 winners, because clearly the person who finished, suppose in each of those, the person who finished second finished a very close second, which it looks like it's going to be fairly, just from the appearance of the individual precincts that they covered. As he said, it looked like Joe Biden may have taken a pretty big hit last night, and that Buttigieg, seemed to come on pretty strong, stronger than anyone anticipated. And maybe, again, this is just reflecting the individual precincts that the person who was anticipated to do extremely strongly did well, but not as strong as people anticipated. But the reality is, we don't know. So it's a crazy situation. but I do think the one thing that wasn't mentioned, I think you're seeing the last of the Iowa caucus. Discussion leading up to the Iowa caucus that's increased really year after year. What is this about Iowa and New Hampshire? Basically, two white states that year after year, get to go first. The Iowa caucus has functioned the way it's functioned only since 1972, following the police riot in 1968 in Chicago. They came up with a new set of rules. Iowa captured it by having a caucus. The New Hampshire primary, I believe, has been operating since about in the 1920s, maybe 1926. I may be wrong about the exact number, but in the early 1920s, I think. Their legislature passed a law that no other state would be allowed to go before them. So if another state jumps ahead of them, well, they just move their primary up a week in advance of the person who moved their primary up. So that we're kind of stuck with New Hampshire, and with Iowa.
Well, hold on. I want to hear more about this when we get on the other side of the break, and I want to hear from you. What do you think about last night? We've been talking about this over the past couple of weeks, but we didn't talk about it this way, Lady B. You know, we're expecting a record turnout, record voter turnout in the fall. Uh, State officials are saying we do not have the wherewithal to handle 66% plus
Right.
of the registered American electorate turning out. But now we have something else new. We talked about smartphones and voting a couple of weeks ago. Now we've got an app that counts the votes, and that didn't work. And look at what's happening. I'm wondering how the people in Iowa are feeling today. How are you feeling today? How are the candidates feeling today? Who did this help? Who did this hurt? Let's talk about it right here on the Santita Jackson Show. And we're talking with Chris McGreal from The Guardian. He is in Iowa, and he has been on the ground. Wow, didn't know well, there are some places where Joe Biden didn't even get a vote. Wow, what is going on out there? What is really happening? Let's talk about it on the Santita Jackson Show. Please go to the Santita Jackson and Friends page on Facebook. We're streaming live. Like and share, and please go to the Santita Jackson Show on YouTube. I need you to like and subscribe. I need you to call us today at 773-763-9278. Latasha Brown, Black Voters Matter. Charles Ellison, WURD in Philadelphia. I'm coming to you. Gotta know what's happening. Reverend Frank Watkins giving us this history lesson about the vote. We still don't know who won Iowa yesterday. We don't know. And it's just interesting. So let's talk about it on the Santita Jackson Show. Back in just a minute.
Word it.
Well, all these we have different variables, right?
Yeah. So I
So
don't know if it's
we have different variables. last night, we do not have a winner. Apparently, this app that was introduced to the Iowa Democratic Party that they were told to keep secret from the people. It's called the Shadow Company. This is according to a New York Times report. Um, well, they kept it a secret, but it's a secret no longer, Chris McGreal. Now everybody knows. Now everybody knows that something happened.
They're hiding in the shadows, and I'd imagine after last night they'll be hiding a lot more if they're still in business even.
Oh my God! I don't know what was the DNC thinking. I don't understand that.
And they just got too clever for their own good. Obviously, you introduce, all these new systems, all this new way of voting and counting, and on top of that, you introduce new technology, and it strikes me as just having made it way too complicated.
It's it's absolutely terrible. Let me go around Reverend Frank Watkins to some people who've jumped on. Everybody wants to talk about this today because this is a big story. Dave Daly, the author of Unrigged: How Americans Are Battling Back to Save Our Democracy. Boy, do we have a battle royale on our hands. Latasha Brown, she's been a Harvard fellow for the past semester. She's going to be going back, but in the meantime, before she goes back, she wants to register some voters. That is what Black Voters Matter. That's what they have been doing that, and boy, oh boy, you will have a lot to teach when you get back to Harvard, girl. This is crazy. Charles Ellison is joining us as well, but Latasha, let me come to you. What is this?
This is problematic on so many levels. One, I think there's some core things that underneath all of this, like it's the Iowa caucus, and it's kind of what you said earlier, hashtag hot mess. That sums it all up. But I think one, what are some key problems is it's so problematic. It's around this lack of transparency. Here we are in this supposedly democratic system, and not in this party that many are kind of literally looking at leadership around how do we bring transparency back in the process has been, quite frankly, not transparent. That you hired a company in an age where we know in the last election cycle, we know that there were Russian interference. There's already a distrust in the election. There's already evidence that there are those that have used technology to undermine the results and the transparency. Whether or not that has something to do, whether we know that has something to do with this process, the mere fact of the appearance that you come and you hire a company named Shadow, but that nobody knows who that company is. Why is there a lack of transparency in a party that's supposed to support democracy? The second thing is it is demoralizing. This is beyond around Iowa voters. We're in a moment right now with a backdrop where we're literally on the eve of when Trump is going to come out and do his probably victory march run for the State of the Union. Because we're doing in this process of impeachment hearings, there are a lot of people who are really demoralized, who are feeling demoralized, and really particularly around democracy. Will democracy work? And so, on the eve of that, on the eve of this possible acquittal of Trump in this scandal, that now you've got a Democratic Party that shows itself not only transparent, but now dysfunctional. And then the third piece, I think that there is also what is this saying? There's a perception. There have been all kinds of, we know that there are different camps, from the Bernie camp to the Buttigieg camp. Here it is that you've got one candidate without any results that jumps out front, Pete Buttigieg, that jumps out front, tweets out that we've been victorious in a very manipulative way, in my opinion, claims victory in this process. And so what it has created, it inks the very thing that what we're fighting in the street, as we're getting people engaged in this process, what we're fighting in the street is people feel like this process is tainted. And now what we have is we've got the Democratic Party who, like, you would get a app 2 months out ahead of you. Like you didn't know that the Iowa caucus was going to happen 4 years ago. That should have been the first thing that we're working on when Trump got elected. So all of this, and there's all kinds of, I talked to a friend earlier today who is um, a very big Bernie supporter. I've not decided who I'm going to support at this point. But a really big Bernie supporter, and she was convinced. She called me. That's how I found out. She was convinced that this was an attempt by the establishment in the party to take away the momentum of the Bernie campaign. Whether or not that is true, the fact that it has the appearance of some impropriety, that is very hurtful to the party overall.
And that becomes a problem, right?
It becomes a problem when we're trying to get people to really engage in this process.
Hold on one moment. Hold on one moment, Latasha, because we're getting a lot of feedback. We're trying to work that out. So hold that thought, because I want to bring on, before I come to you, Charles Ellis and David Daly. Dave Daly, we are battling back to save our democracy, unrigged. Hello, wait a minute. What's going on, David?
I think Latasha really nailed it just at every point, I mean, this is no way to run an election. We've waited 3 years for this night. These candidates have spent a year or more campaigning. Their volunteers, their campaigns going door to door. Democrats had one night to actually make a news splash off of this for the winner of this primary to actually get some attention. This news is going to, trickle out at some point today, and then the president is going to give the State of the Union address, and tomorrow he's going to be acquitted by the Senate, and then the story of Iowa is going to be over, essentially. But there will be no bounce out of Iowa for the winner. There will only be conspiracy theories and problems and recrimination and finger pointing, and it's going to look as if the Democratic Party, at a time in which they're trying to say we can run the country, that they can't even run a caucus. The incompetence on display here is absolutely staggering. It's going to cause more mistrust in the system, in this hyper-polarized atmosphere, and we've got 9 months to get this right before there is an even bigger election. And if we don't have this right in 9 months, look out.
Well, look out, New Hampshire, and look out, South Carolina and Nevada. Look out, because I can't take this. I really can't, because so many people, Charles Ellison, are mistrustful and distrustful of the system itself. First you, Charles, and then I want to go back to you, Reverend Watkins, because Reverend Watkins, has seen this before, and he is part of the team, part of the campaign, and he was indeed one of the architects of changing the rules. I think of Dr. Ron Walters. I think of those of you, these brilliant minds that came together that had to go to the Democratic Party after, while in the midst of this groundbreaking run of Reverend Jackson's that was so unexpected, that his success even in '84 was so unexpected. But we kept bumping into all of these roadblocks. And the big roadblock that you had to face was the Democratic Party. First you, Charles Ellison, and then we're going to go back to Reverend Watkins. And everybody just feel free to jump in, because I'm just trying to figure it all out.
Thanks so much, Santita. You really have to question, you really have to wonder, if Democrats want to win. Because it doesn't seem like they want to win in 2020. It seems like they would rather just spectacularly fail. And that doesn't set what happened last time. What's going on right now does not. It really presents a very bad omen for Democrats and the rest of us heading into 2020 in terms of the presidential race, in terms of some key Senate races as well. Because if you're heading into this election cycle, and your primary objective, your mission, is to remove Donald Trump from the White House. You understand what the existential threat is to you as a party, to the nation as a whole. You would have everything together. Why would you hire a technology company called Shadow? Of all brand names, of all tech companies to hire, you hire something called Shadow. You know that there's this big conversation that's been going on for the past several years now about not only lack of transparency, but a complete breakdown in election security. You go with the firm called Shadow, and then you can't roll out the very first vote of the presidential election cycle. You can't carry it out in an organized fashion or manner. We also have to look at turnout numbers don't look good as well. At least based on the first glance at it, it seems like first-time voters in the Iowa caucus it was much lower than 2016, much lower than 2008 even. Despite the fact that we're in this very anxious moment now, so you would expect that turnout numbers would be much higher. But I think it's probably indicative of, one, a lot of the conversation, a lot of the skepticism surrounding the use of this new technology, and just overly, as your guest from The Guardian was saying earlier, just this overly complicated process. You probably have a situation here where Iowa Democrats, where Democrats in general, the Democratic establishment, just trying too hard to show that, hey, we're still relevant amid all this discussion, all the concerns about the lack of demographic representation that exists in Iowa. So, there's a silver lining here. Probably by the time we get to 2024, we won't have Iowa or New Hampshire. That was definitely Iowa as the first primary or as the first vote of a presidential cycle. And maybe that's not such a bad thing, given that we have these concerns about this very white state, and then you have this very convoluted, complicated process that doesn't have to be that way. Just carry out a vote. Just carry out a primary. So either you won't have Iowa as the first, or Iowa just goes back to a very simple primary process, and that may have excluded or discouraged a lot of folks from participating in that Iowa caucus that unfolded, that mess that unfolded last night.
Let me go to KD. KD from Chicago. You're saying this is a mess. Hey, KD.
Hey, good morning, Santita. Thank you for receiving my call. I'm a Democrat, and I knew this was going to happen, because this is what happened when they decide to run. I did not see anybody going to beat Trump, because Trump is a bully guy. So my preferred person, she's Tom Dickwurst, I called DNC to recommend Tom Dickwurst. The DNC headquarters, I called them to recommend person who can beat Trump. Guess what? There was no somebody picking up the phone. That was a surprise. I knew it. That was 6-7 months ago. So I was not surprised about the message today, because there is no responsibility. Let me be honest with you. There's no responsibility from DNC. Even the people that are leading the DNC, what do you call it? Because if there's not somebody going to pick up somebody's phone in a headquarters, that means it's going to be difficult. That means everything's going to be difficult.
Absolutely. I hear you. It's because you have to have communication, because that was one of the breakdowns last night. Maria, what's on your mind, Maria?
Good morning, Santita, and morning, guests. I am floored. We have nincompoops strategizing at the DNC. What the heck? It's bad enough that there's so much stuff going on and not good stuff, and then to have this added, and then, of course, the name of the mystery company is Shadow. I'm like, you can't make this up. I'm going to use your quote. You cannot make this up. This is outrageous, crazy. Please explain, why did this happen?
Don't look at me, Reverend Frank Watkins. I'm going to pass this hot potato to you. You got it.
Well, I don't know what happened either, but he's right on. I was thinking about Latasha's friend who was a Bernie supporter. First of all, it is true that in 2016 the DNC did put their foot on the scale, was against Bernie Sanders. So in 2020 you hire a company named Shadow. And then you keep it in the shadow, How do you think, the Bernie people are already saying, the media's against them, the DNC's against, they know that they were against them in 2016. They haven't made that accusation in 2020 yet, but it certainly feeds a campaign that could be ripe for such conspiracy series theories. Uh, you were talking about, well, this is the first, and then we're going to have New Hampshire and Nevada and South Carolina, then Super Tuesday when I believe it's 14 states that will be running. I mean, what is the danger there? But the ultimate danger to me is what happens on November 3rd. Suppose Donald Trump loses. I mean, I think he will lose if we can have a fair election, which is the question. But if Donald Trump loses, he can allege, like he did in 2016, that there were, 3 or 6 million illegal immigrants that voted. And therefore, this election that had me losing is illegitimate. It's fraudulent. So the danger of what happened in Iowa could really happen in a unbelievable, real way on November 3rd if Donald Trump loses and then claims fraud and refuses to leave the office.
Oh, Chris McGreal, how are people in Iowa feeling? What are they saying on the ground? What was their reaction last night to all of this?
There was a lot of eye rolling. People were exasperated at the very least, and I imagine by the time they wake up this morning, there'll be quite a lot of anger. Particularly those people who've gone out and worked very hard on the ground for their particular candidate, banging on a lot of doors. It's cold out here, lots of snow, although I guess it's cold in Chicago too, but nonetheless, it's a bit of an endurance test at times, campaigning in Iowa. And I think a lot of them will feel rightly anger that particularly if they were backing a winning candidate, that their hard work's been at the best undermined and maybe even stolen from them. But I get, as this discussion has revealed, there'll be a lot of discussion about Iowa's place and where Iowa goes. I think even within the state, people recognise that this is not a way to run an election. It's embarrassing for the state.
Well, I think it's a yes, Frank Watkins.
If I could say one other word, it's obviously embarrassing to the Democratic Party in Iowa, but to give you some idea, there are just under 1,700 precincts that had caucuses last night. The people who led the caucuses were volunteers. This is not a campaign or an election that is run by paid people from the Democratic Party in the state of Iowa. These are volunteers. The volunteers that I saw last night were mostly older people who would be generally speaking, less inclined to be able to deal with, the technology of a new app. And then I saw one older gentleman, I happened to catch him, he was talking about, well, there are so many votes for so-and-so and so. So I have to multiply that by 1.97864 or some,
Crazy.
Abstract percentage. I mean, the whole system was just kind of crazy last night. But I just wanted to indicate that it's run by volunteers throughout the whole state.
Dave Daly, before I go to this break. Oh yes, Charles.
No, no one wants to be Luddites here. I think in an ideal world, you would have this sort of technology available, so you make the voting franchise much more accessible, right? I would love to see the day where we have the type of system where everyone could vote by app. They could vote from the comfort of their own home, and no longer do we have to complain about elections not being on holidays, not being on the weekends. or having to go for miles to get to a polling precinct. I mean, it really amazes me how it's so easy for us to engineer technology to carry out an American Idol vote, like a nationwide vote for a reality show or for an entertainment dance show, but we can't develop that kind of technology for something so crucial as the vote. And that, I think so. So it's really sort of sad commentary on the state of how we're carrying out this process, this foundational infrastructure called elections, called voting.
Well, I when we come back, I mean, I think this is all such an issue. I just want to know how we're supposed to. I don't. Before we even get to November, Reverend Watkins, I'm trying to get through the primary process because now I'm concerned about New Hampshire. I was already concerned about the voting process, but I'm concerned about South Carolina. I'm concerned about Nevada, and and everybody else is too. We're trying to figure out how our votes can be counted. The thing is, voting, it should not be this hard. And in fact, it ought not be this hard. It is not this hard. We are seeing, and Dave Daly has written about it brilliantly, the barriers to our vote. This is what we're seeing it. We're seeing it in real time. And when we ran for president, Reverend Frank Watkins, we people called us paranoid and crazy. Well, I think you have been vindicated, my dear friend, my Uncle Frank. You have been vindicated. I mean, Latasha, we're not crazy. This is crazy. How can we not have our results? How can you offer up? I mean, you can't, Chris McGreal, from the Guardian. You can't make this up. Shadow. You give people an app to count the votes 2 months, and you don't before the election. Back in a minute. Come on.
Glassdoor. Find the right
That's
fit for your
crazy.
up, Chicago? This is the Santita Jackson Show.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Santita Jackson Show on WCPT 820, the nation's largest progressive talk radio station, the Santita Jackson Show, streaming live on YouTube on the Santita Jackson Show page. Please like and subscribe. And here on Facebook on the Santita Jackson and Friends page. Please like and share. And you know what? Look at what we did last night with Let's Talk About It with Santita Jackson and Friends. Got a few thousand people who tuned in, and it was great. And we want you all to look at it today, because we talked about really voting in Iowa, the whole process of voting, why it's so important, and some of the challenges that we have in trying to select a candidate. But now we see that we're trying to make sure that our votes will count. You know, you cannot make this stuff up. You really, really can't. And so we are going to talk about that with you today, about about your thinking about Iowa. When you wake up this morning and you see that we still do not have a winner. When you find out that the program that was in charge, that the app, rather, that was to tabulate the results, that it was really foisted upon the Iowa Democratic Party 2 months ago, and they were told to keep it a secret. And of course, you can't make this up. This company is called the Shadow Company. And look at what happened. Look at what happened here. Will this happen in New Hampshire? Will this happen in Nevada? Will this happen in South Carolina? Will this happen any place else? Will this happen November 3rd, 2020? Call me at 773-763-9278, 773-763-WCPT, and reach out to me on Twitter at SantitaJ, and at WCPT 820, and let's talk about this. Let's talk about our election system here as we are looking at impeachment. Wait a minute, you've got the president's going to be speaking tonight, his State of the Union address, and he has said that, Democrats, you cannot even handle a caucus. How can you handle the United States of America? Oh, please. So he's going to be doing the State of the Union tonight. That's worthy of a mention, don't you think? And under the specter of impeachment, everybody's expecting him to be exonerated by a Republican, a highly partisan Senate. But what is all of this is happening in that context. So what does that mean? We're going to be talking with Ron Fine about it. He was so kind to come back and speak with us about this. And of course, you've got to get his book. The Constitution Demands It. The Case for the Impeachment of Donald Trump. All of this is happening in this context, everybody. I mean, every day you got whiplash. And then Glenda Carr, Higher Heights. The premier voting advocacy group for black women, and of course she joined Latasha Brown, Harvard Fellow, Black Voters Matter, and we are so glad to have you with us, Glenda Carr and Ron Fine. Glad that you are back, joining Reverend Frank Watkins, really one of the pillars, one of the architects of the modern civil rights movement, David Daley. You got to get his book. He is on tour right now with Unrigged, How Americans Are Battling Back to Save Democracy. But you know what? You need to also read his book, Rat Effed, The True Story of the Secret Plan to Steal Our Democracy, because I feel like we're living through that right now. I got a couple of headlines before we go to our guest. The coronavirus, the first Hong Kong death has been reported, as the cases in China are passing 20,000 persons. Boy, oh boy, oh boy, that is so sad. And, it turns out one of my godchildren's over there. I thought she had gotten home.
Oh,
no. Bless her heart. So I'm really, really worried about her, because now she can't leave China. She can't leave. Was over there working, student, and all of that. I don't know. It's a whole lot, everybody. Healthcare is supposed to have been the top priority for Iowans yesterday, but they also said that it was electability, depending upon the reports that you heard or read. So we will see. I think now getting their votes counted is the real deal. Well, we find out that, according to the New York Times, they broke the story that the app used to tabulate votes is said to have been inadequately tested. They received, the Iowa Democratic Party received this app 2 months ago. 2 months ago. It was never tested statewide, and they were instructed to keep it a secret. And the company is called Shadow. Lots and lots and lots of confusion. And of course, the president has taken this opportunity on the eve of his State of the Union address, on the eve of being exonerated in his impeachment trial, um, uh, he is jubilant. His campaign, they are all jubilant as the Democrats' big night implodes. But I have a lot of questions for our panel. Who who could this help? I mean, it seems that there could be some winners and losers here. Could be some winners and losers here. I don't know. I don't know. They say the so-called conspiracy theories have been unleashed, but are they conspiracy theories, really? Or did something sinister happen? Or was this just a horrible, horrible mistake? But I just find it hard to believe that with a primary that was 4 years in the making, that you would give officials an app 2 months before, 2 months before, 2 months before the election, tell them to use it and you don't test it statewide. That to me is absolutely bizarre. I just can't imagine. And so, joining Latasha Brown and and Reverend Frank Watkins and Dave Daly, the author of Unrigged: How Americans Are Battling Back to Save Democracy, are Ron Fine. Ron Fine. He does such great work with Free Speech for People. His book, The Constitution Demands It: The Case for the Impeachment of Donald Trump, and Glenda Carr. Really, there is no greater advocate for black women and the vote, and those of us who are trying to run for office. That is what Higher Heights does. They lift us to higher heights. Thank you both for joining us today. How are you, Glenda Carr? Good morning. Good morning. Your reaction to Iowa?
Well,
Oh, okay, I got you.
well, one, I was texting some colleagues, and we were like, "You got your hair tied up already?" It was a long night, and we live in what should be the country that is leading in um, voter innovation and voter participation, and we find ourselves still struggling to implement 21st century voting tools. And so this is a very strong. I think two things happen just from a access to voting. Iowa is showing that other states that have implemented new voting tools and voting technology that with a 24-hour news cycle and social media, that I am sure there are meetings across this country for voter boards of elections to ensure that the elections that are primaries that are coming up, that this doesn't happen. But my fear is that we live in a country where people don't think their vote matters, and we've now seen a very public fail last night, and people are going to doubt. Does their vote actually matter, or does this process actually matter? And so for groups and advocates like Latasha and all of my colleagues, we're going to have to double down and actually not only ensure that Americans across this country understand the importance of this election cycle, that we still need to come out and organize our network to the poll. But this has shown a huge light on the ability to integrate new technology, but also, frankly, we've all worked in campaigns for decades. The notion that they could not react and go back to that there was no B plan last night to be able to just do old-fashioned voter tallying precinct by precinct, which we all started our careers being able to just write, paper.
you know, well, Glenda, let me, Ron Fine, social promotion does not work. That is to say, when you were in first grade, if you hadn't mastered certain fundamentals, they would not promote you to second grade. They just wouldn't do it because it would be to your detriment. And so I'm seeing this introduction of this technology when we haven't mastered just the basics of voting, the basics. I mean, because now we're in the context of the 2020 election, and watching this is not a good look for the Democrats, particularly when we've got the State of the Union address tonight. All the air has been sucked out of the Iowa, whatever we could have gotten out of Iowa, because we're looking at his State of the Union address. We're looking at an impeachment that it seems like he's going to be able to get out of that. I mean, what are you seeing, Ron Fine?
Well, thank you for having me on. Santita, and I think Glinda Carr made a fantastic point, which is that paper really is reliable. And although some people may think that an app or computers in general are a more high-tech and modern way of voting, it turns out that hand-marked paper is the most reliable. And one good thing that will come out of Iowa is that we'll see eventually they'll get the accurate count, because those votes were marked by hand, in fact, in public, and the issue is simply with counting them up, whereas many people around the country, including in battleground states like Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and others, are being required to vote on electronic voting machines, where you don't necessarily have the ability to go back to what the voter marked by hand. So this is setting a bit of an omen that unless we can get the voting methods themselves to be reliable, that there's going to be a lot of questions about the integrity of the vote.
David Daly, this seems like your book, you were right on time. First, when I met you a couple of years ago, well, several years ago now, Rat Aft, the true story of the secret plan to steal our democracy. Now, Unrigged, how Americans are battling back to save democracy. What should Americans do about what happened in Iowa yesterday? Because I know a lot of people have got to be disappointed, angry.
Is an epic meltdown. I mean, if Iowa does not lose its first in the nation status after this, it will be absurd, right? I mean, this is the one thing that I mean, for 3 years and 3 months, Democrats have waited to begin voting to pick somebody to run against Donald Trump, and look at what happened last night. Just this incompetence at absolutely every level of the way. And, I don't think that the media necessarily held themselves up in any great way either. I mean, Mayor Pete comes on last night and declares victory with 0.0% of the vote. And a news media that 4 years ago during the 2016 campaign ran Donald Trump rallies for hours on end, that focused in on his empty podium even, that just let him broadcast his lies straight into every living room in the nation. And the media says, we learned from what happened in 2016, so we're not going to do that again. The very first chance they have in this election, with a candidate at a rally spouting absolute nonsense designed to spin and obfuscate a process that has been a disaster, and they just let this go and go. It almost doesn't matter what result is going to come out of Iowa now.
Wow.
The talk is going to be about the disaster, about the meltdown, and there are going to be impressions, perhaps, that Mayor Pete won because he came out and claimed victory.
And it went, and David, it went unchallenged. It went unchallenged. I mean, because what does victory mean?
In 2016, it was completely unchallenged. They allowed this to just go on and on. Now,
Wait, and David, hold on. David, and in the montages of people's speeches last night, oftentimes they played him first. So he was cast before the American public, at least those of us who watch cable, as the victor.
And the media went along with it. Even though they all knew that this was off of 0.0% of the votes. It was breathtaking. I mean, it was a masterful stroke by a McKinsey operative, right? I mean, it's probably exactly the kinds of things that they train you to do as an operative at that secretive consulting company he worked at for all those years.
Now, maybe it's Shadow. Latasha Brown? I don't know. Latasha?
I think I ditto everything that was said. I think there's a couple of things that we're going to have to look into. The first thing is I agree. Iowa is over. Regardless of the outcome, Iowa is over. That whatever was the intention to build momentum in this campaign around particular candidates' campaigns, to send a message around starting this Democratic Party season, around this election of the nominee that would go against Donald Trump, all of that has been lost. So we can stick a pin in it.
Okay.
Iowa is over. I don't think I think that the results at this point are going to be suspect at best. I think that what you're going to see is you're going to start seeing several candidates, several Democratic nominees claim victory. Whether or not, I mean, we saw Pete Buttigieg just jump out and claim a victory, which I think we also have to hold him accountable because it's very. I would not put masterful to it. I would say it's manipulative.
Mm.
That knowing that he did not win. I mean, is that not the same thing we're seeing with Donald Trump? It's almost like we're sending this message that whoever can be the most maniacal, whoever can be the most manipulative in some way that we're assigning them value. No, what he did was not necessarily what I consider masterful. I feel like it was manipulative. And aside from that, and I don't, it's not, I think it's also, I think there's a deeper issue around how the Democratic Party and its vendors. There's a longer conversation that we have on another day around how we have seen these vendors, we've seen these tech companies where normally by these young white males out of Silicon Valley that will come up with an idea, an issue, and they will come and it becomes the new technology of the day, not because there's some empirical evidence that it's good, it's not because that they've actually put out a call for who's the best, but it's who has the relationships. And I think that that's a part that we've got to also uncover around the what has been corrupted in this process that also has become a money game with companies that not have demonstrated in any way that they have the capacity or the willingness or to create a election based in integrity, but quite frankly, they have political contacts, and as a result, they get these contracts. And so I think that there are layers of issues. I think American democracy and the fragility of American democracy is being exposed. And I think at this point, we really have to take a really deep look and not just taking leadership from the party. We've got to take control as people who really are committed to democracy and make sure that these parties are accountable to us. But I also believe that the impact of Iowa is over at this point. I think we've got to move forward, and it's really going to be us not having trust in the system. People are going to have to rise up, and we're going to have to literally stand in the gap and make sure and demand integrity by all elected officials, by both parties around this process going forward.
Amen. And that leads me back to you, Ron Fine, the author of The Constitution Demands It, the case for the impeachment of Donald Trump. We have President Trump who will be giving his State of the Union address tonight in the aftermath of this. While he's under the specter of impeachment, he hasn't been exonerated yet, although it appears that is going to happen tomorrow or the next day. What is our takeaway from all of this?
I think we have to remember that no matter what happens in the Senate's final vote, Trump has not been exonerated. First of all, the impeachment itself is a stain that will last on him forever. But secondly, the trial was a sham by not bringing forth witnesses, by not allowing John Bolton to testify. The Senate has made its ultimate vote, which we are widely expecting to fail to convict him, to not be an exoneration, but simply to be a cover-up. Now, the House chose to focus on these narrow matters about the 2020 election interference with Ukraine and obstruction of Congress. There's much more impeachable conduct that Trump has committed and will continue to commit. In fact, there's reporting already that he's planning to use the Justice Department to go after his enemies list, which now includes John Bolton as an example. He's looking for criminal investigations into Schiff and Nadler, apparently. And so we are not out of this yet and will not be as long as he remains in office. So it's important to remember that whatever happens on Wednesday night, Trump has been impeached, and he is continually a danger to the country.
Frank Watkins, do you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I agree. I'm looking for the headline. I'm surprised there hadn't been a headline in the newspaper this morning. Who won Iowa? Only the shadow knows.
Oh my! Look, you know what,
But
Frank? You
I would
can't make
also,
this up. Frank, you can't make this up. This is so crazy. Wait a minute. But no, back up. This is the Democratic Party told these folks in Iowa to use this program from the shadow company, keep it a secret. You have it for 2 months. You all have been planning this for 4 years. Okay, 2 months before the primary, we're going to give it to you. Now you use it. Don't tell anyone that where this is coming from. And you do no statewide test. Reverend Frank Watkins, what is this? I'm sorry, ladies. Now my sister Latasha and Glenda know what this. What is this? You know what that means? Tying up my hair in the middle of the night. Please, I couldn't even get my hair tied up. My hair's looking crazy today because I was up all night watching this madness.
only the shadow knows. But I would also I would remind people who are looking at Iowa this year that in 2016, if you remember, it was a very close race between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. As a matter of fact, it was so close that only 4 votes separated them involving 2 precincts. You know how they decided who the winner was? They flipped a coin, and Bernie Sanders lost both races, and that flipped the votes. Otherwise, it would have been a tie. So that's how, again, the Iowa caucuses work. I think another point is that what we're talking about in terms of the insecurity of our election system, it reflects the country's lack of commitment to democracy. Now, contrast how we deal with voting with how we deal with our money. Look at all the kind of things that we can do electronically and so forth, apparently securely, with our bank accounts, with our credit cards. We can go online and see, how much money we have left in the bank, whether we got $10 or $50 left. So the technology for handling our money is far advanced to the way we handle our democracy. And the last thing I would say, it surfaced this morning that during the Super Bowl, you remember how Donald Trump treated Colin Kaepernick relative to his kneeling during the national anthem. Well, they now have a video of Donald Trump during the Super Bowl when the national anthem was played. Everybody else in the room, he was at a Super Bowl party, everyone else in the room was standing and had their hand over their heart. Donald Trump was acting a fool, acting like he was leading an orchestra, doing everything in the world to distract from what was actually happening. His son was standing next to him, his wife was standing a little off to the right, and both of them had their hands over their heart, but Donald Trump was acting a fool.
Well, now there you have it. We're talking with this wonderful panel. You've got to get this book. The Constitution demands it because you are right, Ron Fine. There is no exoneration. In fact, the president is going to give his State of the Union address tonight while under the specter of impeachment. We haven't seen this since Bill Clinton. In the midst of this chaos coming out of Iowa. But you're right, Latasha Brown. Iowa is behind us, but sometime I think it's going to kind of linger too. I mean, we've got to come out with some answers here. Glenda Carr, I mean, you're trying to you're trying to get people to vote, and you're trying to get people to run for office. How do we do that with this? Everybody get David Daley's book, Unrigged, How Americans Are Battling Back to Save Democracy. We've got to battle to save our democracy because, Frank Watkins, you're right. You see that some folks are not really supportive of democracy. And I think we need to put that front and center and deal with that. And we have to make a decision about whether we want a republic that is becoming a democracy. We have to make that decision. We have to make that decision. That's why you have to ask questions about Iowa and demand answers. You need to ensure this will not happen going forward in any other primary, and certainly not on November 3rd when they're expecting 180 to 190 million voters to come out and vote. And you've got to figure out what kind of authority does a president have when he's under impeachment? And the U.S. Senate, it looks like they're going to at least vote to let him off without hearing any witnesses. Wow. We got a lot to talk about on the Santita Jackson Show, and we have a lot of people who've called in. So, my panel, I want you to stay right here so that we can talk with all of these folks who want to sound off today. Keep calling us at 773-763-WCPT, 773-763-9278. I promise you, we're going to work to get you in today. More of the Santita Jackson Show. Please go to the Santita Jackson and Friends page here on Facebook. Like and share, and go to the Santita Jackson Show on YouTube and like and subscribe. Back in just a minute.
Oh my God, they're on fire.
Here's the latest.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Santita Jackson Show, WCPT 820. I've got two published authors with me, actually three. Reverend Frank Watkins has several books, and we're going to have to bring him back to talk about these books. There's so much history that he has, particularly with presidential politics, civil rights overall, the modern civil rights era. But he's one of the architects of Reverend Jackson's presidential campaigns, and we're going to have him come back to talk about that, because I think Latasha Brown and Glenda Carr and David Daley and Ron Fine, that's very, very important at this time, because the rules that we're seeing, number one, Bernie Sanders came out of the Jackson campaign. That's number one. But the rules that he's running on, the rules that Barack Obama ran and won on, were implemented by the Jackson campaign, because when they first ran, it was a winner-take-all system, and it was so unfair. And I remember Frank Watkins, when Reverend came out of Michigan, having won overwhelmingly in 1988. We had the Big Mo, and we got to Wisconsin, and the machines broke down, which blunted his momentum. It was just, you just saw a lot of things happening that blunted the momentum and kind of removed the nomination from his grasp. So I can't wait to talk with you about that. David Daley, everybody, you need to get this book, Unrigged, How Americans Are Battling Back to Save Democracy. That is where we are when we're looking at Iowa. And this impeachment, the president's giving the State of the Union tonight. You know, Ron Fine, he is going to clown the Democrats tonight. The Constitution demands it, everybody. You've got to get this book. The case for the impeachment of Donald Trump, of course, all that will be up on WCPT820.com so that you can get these books. And, of course, Glenda Carr from Higher Heights. She is running black women for office. Black women are moving the needle politically. We are. And this is, you have organizations that promote women, but they're not black women. This is what Higher Heights does. And they get us voting. And I love it, love it, love it. And Latasha Brown, I'm so proud of her. She's been a Harvard fellow. And she is also a great singer. I had to call her out on that. Yes, she is. And she's going to be recording. Yes, I said it, Latasha. People didn't. She is a great singer. Okay. Yes, she is. she is.
The audience knows, so are you. You are a classically trained singer as well. So I just want to shout you back out.
Hey, you didn't have to call me out, but I'm all right. But yeah, I got you, boo. Bumped into you on Twitter. Let me get some of these callers in, because people want to talk. Bobby, how you doing, Bobby?
Hi.
Hey.
How you doing?
What's on your mind? What's on your mind today?
Well, I've been listening to you for quite a while, Santita, and the one thing that irks me about my favorite radio station, WCPT, is we don't talk about the voter turnout. 68 or 64% of the legal voting age voter doesn't even show up to the polls, but yet they'll stand in line for a new iPhone. But we don't care about the state of our country.
But why do you think that is, Bobby? Bobby, what do you think? Why do you think that is?
I think that the media and the powers that be are putting everything in our way to distort our view on what's important. Our life in this country right now is threatened by a Republican president that could care less about anything but a dollar. I worked in a company that poured the Trump Towers, and we didn't get paid. Why? Because Trump doesn't pay bills, and he doesn't like unions. Why would America vote for a clown like this? He's like a used car salesman. It's driving me crazy, Santita. I'm a devout Democrat. My father was a veteran until he died at 92. And we had this conversation back and forth about Republicans versus Democrats. For 50 years, I've been hearing this nonsense. We just have to get to the polls. Yes, the Electoral College makes a variance as to who's going to win. But voters have to turn out. If the numbers aren't there, guess who wins?
Look, amen to that. Frank Watkins, why don't you respond to Bobby?
I'm sorry, I was a little just.
No worry. Well, you know what, Bobby? I mean, I want David Daley, anyone on the panel, Glenda, Latasha, Ron. I mean, David. You all have at it, because we don't push the vote enough.
I will say a couple of things. One, I want to thank Bobby. I do think that Bobby raised some great points, and I agree that there are certainly distractions that are keeping people from engaging in the process. But I also want to offer something else as well, because I am doing voter work and I'm on the ground. I can also speak to the hundreds of black voters in Georgia that were standing in line for hours trying to cast their vote, but we were told that there wasn't enough machines, or the machines that were here didn't have enough cords, or even people who were like the cousin of Dr. Martin Luther King, an 80-plus-year-old woman who went to vote and her name was dropped off the rolls because of a purge in illegally dropped off the rolls because of the purge. I think that we also got to be really honest about that. Part of the process that is feeding into voter apathy is people's distrust of the system, and it is warranted that there is some voter integrity issues. That here we are, just as Frank said earlier, here we are in a country that we can move billions of dollars of money, billions of dollars over the internet, with technology, and secure that. Most of us do our banking. I pay my mortgage. I pay all of my bills online. So we actually have a system that is secure enough to move billions of dollars, yet we can't figure out how to move the vote or secure the vote. I don't think that is a matter of the ability or whether the technology exists. I think it's a matter of we're not committed to voter integrity in this country, that we really have not been committed to what democracy looks like. Because I can also share that while we're talking about, I often say, I'm working on a piece right now saying that the party is over that. Ultimately, the Constitution does not say we, the party, it says we, the people. But we're seeing when we're in an age where we got 33 million people have been dropped from the polls, from the voting rolls, and we hear virtually nothing leadership from the Democratic Party around making voter suppression a key issue. That in itself is a problem, and that leads to voter apathy. The fact that you got working class folk that are who are getting paid by the hour, that we're asking them, they're going to the polls and they've got to work, they've got to stand in line for 2 and 3 hours. It's utterly ridiculous. Part of what we've got to have is a greater analysis around how this country has not shown itself to be serious about democracy and putting the tools and the processes in place that to make sure that all voters matter in this country, and that is an engagement process. And quite frankly, there have been elected officials on both sides of the aisle, on the Democratic and the Republican Party, that have not necessarily been interested in expanded democracy because of fear of them making them own selves vulnerable and new voters come into the process. And so I think that we really got to have a deeper analysis around this. That one, while this is certainly a part of people not participating in the process, two, what is leading to this culture of folks not participating and feeding into voter apathy and feeding into the process that even when people are voting, that their votes are not being counted, or even when people have consistently participated in the process, that somehow their rights are not being protected. So this is a greater moment for us to really think about and really examine the fragility of democracy in this country and demand that our political leadership makes it a key and core issue as we go forward.
Amen to that.
And I got the point. I got the point now. So Reverend Jesse Jackson talks about, we all focus about WikiLeaks and the leaking of the information and so forth during the Donald Trump Hillary Clinton campaign, and so everybody's concerned about WikiLeaks. But Reverend Jackson says he's more concerned about TrickyLeaks. All the suppression tactics that are going on around the country is what concerns him. 22 states have passed laws that make it more difficult to vote. In Texas, they passed a law where you could use your gun ID to vote, but which was state issued, but if you use your state issued student ID, you couldn't vote. In a case in North Carolina, they said they had targeted African American voters with surgical precision. That is to keep them from voting. They identified certain characteristics of African Americans in North Carolina, and then they designed a law to make sure that it disproportionately affected, African American people. Like something like 60 or 70% of African Americans voted early, so they cut back early voting to 2 weeks instead of 4 weeks. And they did all kinds of tricks like that to keep black people from voting. So we should be concerned about tricky leaks, the Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Iranians interfering in our election. But we should be more concerned, I think, about tricky leaks, all these voter suppression efforts going around the country that Natasha was talking about.
Ron Fine, how is the president shaping the culture here?
The president, with his constant rhetoric about elections being rigged, has not contributed to a sense of security and reliability of our elections. But the truth is that, as the other panelists have mentioned, there are measures in place in many states, both to reduce the number of people who are eligible to register to vote, to make it harder to register, to make it harder to vote. And in many cases, including in Georgia, as was mentioned earlier, when you have electronic voting machines of various types, those machines can be down for a while and they have to be restarted, and they, of course, can be hacked. And in the meantime, lines are building up, and people look at a line and they see it's 3 hours long, and they get discouraged, and then they don't vote. So I think Bobby raised a really important point that, obviously we want to improve turnout, but that the voting methods and systems that we have in place are in some cases designed or have the effect of suppressing turnout. And coming back to your question about President Trump, he benefits from chaos, and he's going to seize any gap to declare his own victories. And we already saw him doing that with Iowa last night. So the way to keep the focus on having a secure and reliable vote at the same time that we hold President Trump to account it's a narrow and difficult path, but we have to move forward on both of these fronts.
I do want to say this too, Santita. I think we've got to really think about this and think about who's Democratic, who's democracy or not. And so to have a president, regardless of what political party, what candidate, to have a president to celebrate the breakdown in democracy, we need to think about that.
Oh, wait. Hey, yeah. Stay right there. Stay right there. We need to think about that he would cheer something like this. What does that say to you? Latasha, what does that say? What does that say that he cheered this on?
It's not, we've got political leadership in this country that fundamentally is anti-democratic. That any time that there is a system of democracy, and he's shown that from the Russian interference and to the call of China and others to interfere in the election, we have fundamentally in this country that democracy is supposed to be a value, that has been eroded, and we have a current leader who is actually celebrating the breakdown of democracy. And so to me, what that says is that we literally got to take the seriousness of this election. This isn't just about whether the Republicans or the Democrats are going to have power. This is literally not about how do we protect a system that we know inherently and the system that we have is flawed, right? Or we would be where we are. But this is really about if we fundamentally believe that we are a country of the people, for the people, and by the people, that we make that be true. And the way that we make that be true is that on every front, that we just can't keep telling people to go and vote. Yeah, just go and vote. We've got to tell people that we've got to rise up. We got to go to the streets, whatever we have to do to demand that we have the kind of democracy that we deserve, that we deal with voter suppression, that we have voter integrity, that we have a Bill of Rights for voters in this country, and that ultimately when we get to the polls that we are assured that the government that we're paying our taxes to, the government that we are literally a part and have built, that we are requiring that it address the needs of people and not necessarily it becomes a tool for the political parties to get their own power.
David Daly, isn't that what you're talking about in your book, Unrigged, How Americans Are Battling Back to Save Democracy?
Yeah, it's exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, I would just give a giant amen to everything we have heard. We are serious about voting in this country. We are serious about making it harder to vote in this country. I mean, 30 3 million Americans purged from the voting rolls since 2014. Thousands of precincts shut down. The kinds of surgical efforts to make it harder for blacks and other Americans to vote in North Carolina, Wisconsin, Ohio, the 25 states that have added voter ID laws since 2010 and have searched intentionally for the exact kind of ID that they know that black Americans are least likely to have, or if they require something like a driver's license, like they do in Wisconsin, they simply make sure that the form you need isn't available at the driver's license office, or like they did in Alabama, where you would have to go into the driver's license office and they would simply close it down something like 28 out of 30 days of the month. There are lots and lots of barriers being placed between Americans and the vote. It is cynical. You have a president of the United States who is then encouraging these ideas of rigged elections, and then we have just this incompetent election administration happening in Iowa last night, that in an era of hyper-partisanship and deep polarization and mistrust in this country is only going to throw gasoline on this fire. And we are 9 months away from Election Day. We are now at the start of primary season. It's game on. And if all of this continues, we are setting ourselves up for an election in which everyone is going to cry fraud, and the results are not going to be accepted. They're going to be seen as illegitimate. And then where are they going to end up? In a Supreme Court that we already view in many ways as partisan and political. This is going to be a long year, my friends.
Chaparral, what's on your mind today?
Let me tell you something. I was watching the results from Iowa last night, and I was just floored. I couldn't believe that we didn't have a clear winner. But all during the day, I kept saying to myself, they're trying to steal this again from Bernie. Now, I'm a staunch Warren person, but I'm like, okay, this made me feel some type of way that they're trying to push Buttigieg as the front runner, and not, all yesterday on every news channel they were calling him socialist, and then they started calling him a communist. This is all I was hearing about Bernie yesterday. And then they were saying how the polls are showing that Buttigieg is moving really good. And when you was looking at the caucuses live, everybody was saying that Bernie had won this. So when I woke up this morning and Pete Buttigieg gave a acceptance speech, I'm like, wait a minute, and we still have 0%? How did this happen? And so my thing at this point, I think that we need to call for the Democratic leadership to resign. Tom Perez needs to resign. He needs to go. He is doing nothing to help the Democratic Party. This is going to be a broker convention again. And you will see that Bernie supporters will sit down and not participate in this election again. And Trump will slide right into 2020. And my thing is that one of the things I found ironic is that they said the Shadow Company was someone who actually did polling for Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. And then David Plouffe he said he's on the board of the company, but he had no idea that they were running this election app for the Iowa caucuses and the Nevada caucuses. And so I'm like, wow, so what's really going on here? I mean, we already are skeptical of the election process. I mean, we heard that New York had already told us that the Russians are still doing whatever they're doing. So we don't know where this is coming from. We don't know if it's the Russians or if it's the actual DNC trying to steal and sabotage the election again.
Yeah, Chaparral, because we don't have to leave the United States of America to find bad actors in our elections. We already have the Supreme Court gut the Voting Rights Act. I mean, come on. I mean, let Putin look. And with all the elections that we interfere in, I think we just need to really Let's deal with all these bad actors who we have right here, because he did not purge 34 million voters. We did that. Dave Daly wrote a book about it, rat effed. There was a plan, a secret plan. It's a true story. That's the name of this book, on rat effed, that told you that these people have plotted to purge your votes, to take your votes, and they have purged 34 million votes since 2014, between 2014 and 2018, and they're accelerating the process even now. I mean, really, this is awful. I've got to run. I've got to run because we're going to be off the air in about 3 minutes. So I just want to get some quick thoughts. Stay right there, Chapearl, because I know you are full, girl. You are full today. Glenda Carr, give us a word.
Yeah, I mean, in a country that democracy is the foundation to our ability to move this country forward. And so we are, as voters, discouraged in these current times, but we need to stand strong in the ability to raise our voices and ensure our votes are counted. I think your first caller brought up a good point. His passion about the importance of engagement in these politically toxic and racially divisive times is our call to action. And it is to stay true to the work to ensure that our voices matter. But frankly, it is about us having conversations across this country with our families, online and offline, that this is the time to double down. And, democracy doesn't begin and end on election day. So we are on the road to the 2020 election, and we need to ensure that we are holding our elected officials accountable and, frankly, creating the environment for our elected officials, particularly on the state legislative level,
Yes.
To be pushing and advancing policies that ensure that our votes are not only not suppressed but counted.
Well, the final minute belongs to you, Ron Fine. To paraphrase your book, The Constitution Demands It, the case for the impeachment of Donald Trump. Well, citizenship demands it. We've got to vote, and we deserve to have our vote protected. The last minute belongs to you.
Well, thank you, Santita. I think you brought up some really important issues today, and I think the most important of them is that we are fighting for our democracy. And this is not just a typical election. This is not just a typical year, but we are fighting for the Constitution and democracy itself.
And I'm so glad that you all were patient. You, Reverend Frank Watkins, Ron Fine, David Daly, Latasha Brown, and Glenda Carr. Thank you all for coming on and having this watch party, if you will. I felt like it was like a watch night service in church. I know Reverend Frank Watkins can relate to that too, and Latasha Brown and Glenda Carr. Ron Fine. This is just how we do what we do. And I'm glad that you all were all here today, because one of the things that I would love to see the mainstream media do is be fair. I'd love to see Ron Fine on television today. I'd love to see Reverend Frank Watkins on television today, and Glenda Carr and Latasha Brown. They have so much to say, so much to offer, and I'm so glad that you have that you use this platform. And I just thank you for being so responsive. Everybody, vote, 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 vote. Go to 1-866-OUR-VOTE. Call them. Find out if you've been purged. Go to vote.org. Find out if you've been purged. Stay right here. We're going to have a few more words as soon as we get off the air, right here on the Santita Jackson and Friends page on Facebook, and on the Santita Jackson Show on YouTube. I love you, everybody. Stay right here. Let's have a few more moments about Iowa.
Glassdoor. Find the
hon, I'm so sorry I did not get to you. I was just trying to keep, I'm going to try to give some final words to Reverend Frank Watkins, Ron Fine, Latasha Brown, and Glenda Carr. You know, we talk for a couple minutes after we get off the air, everybody. But Ron, you've been so patient, and please accept my profound apologies for not getting you on air, but we'd love to speak with you now. What's on your mind today, Ron?
Well, we're going to set it with the State of the Union.
Hold on, Ron. Fine. This is Mr. Ron, who's been a devoted listener. Mr. Ron, give us your thought, and then Ron Fine, I want you to jump in and give us a closing thought. Yes, we got two Rons today.
Okay. Good morning to you. As a long-time voter, many of the ways we vote are crazy. First of all, we need more than one day.
Hold on, Mr. Ron, do you have the radio on? Thank you. No worries.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Okay. First of all, we should have more than one day of voting. It makes no sense. And everybody's born in America.
Oh, Mr. Ron, you know, we're going to have to put you on hold because we're still getting a lot of feedback. Put him on hold, and we will get back to you. And Chaparral, I promise you we'll get back to you. But we're getting the feedback here in the studio. Okay. Don't know what it is. Well, you know, I think we're just going to have to let everybody. Well, now we're not getting it. So there you go. Reverend Frank Watkins, your final thought, your closing thought?
Donald Trump impeachment situation, tomorrow he is likely to be acquitted. Acquittal, you know, is a judgment, a verdict that a person is not guilty of a criminal charge. He will not be exonerated, which would be to basically, after investigating his case, concluding that you know, his indictment or whatever was wrong. So tomorrow he will be acquitted, but he will not be exonerated.
Okay, well, let me ask you then. So, what should our takeaway be? Because I think he's going to play this as an exoneration.
Sure, we're left with one option, which is November 3rd, to come out in record numbers and take this man out of office, because what he did is going to continue to come out. You know, Bolton's book is due out on March the 17th. Liv Parnas, he is adding to the verification of what Donald Trump actually did. He is not being discredited, even though he is under criminal indictment. You know, I've always heard that if truth comes out of a trash can, it's still the truth. And so he's under criminal indictment, but what he is revealing is simply verifying what we've mostly known. He's just filling in some of the details. So we have to come out in record numbers. We cannot be discouraged. To quote somebody you might know, we need to keep hope alive and to fight. We need to resist this attack on our democracy. Natasha Brown is exactly right, that and the others, that our democracy is really at stake, and so we must fight to save our democracy.
Amen to that. Glenda Carr, your thoughts?
Heartily agree. You know, this week is, you know, a long week. We went from last night with the Iowa caucuses to this evening State of the Union tomorrow, and what will most likely be the conclusion to the impeachment trial. And then at the end of the week, as you know, the candidates are heading to New Hampshire. And so what we need to do are, I believe, two things. It is obviously a major election year. There's a lot of conversations about the top of the ticket and the candidates vying for our votes, particularly within the African American community. So I would offer a resource. So Higher Heights for America recently launched Where They Stand. So we worked with most of the presidential candidates on the Democratic side, and these candidates, 6 of them have participated and filled out a extensive questionnaire about the issues that we care about. So I encourage your listeners to go to the higherheightsforamerica.org and to see the candidates in their own words. But in addition to that, we have elections, from local elections to state legislative elections, statewide elections. And so we need to be engaged in ensuring that we are informed about the candidates that are vying for our votes up and down the ballot. And the way we do ensure that we are having policies that are being advanced that affect our communities in particular is ensuring that we change the face of leadership. And so there are, amazing candidates running across this country, and we need to support them with our time, talent, and resources. I think that is the work leading into November. But we have primaries that are happening, and these primaries are not just presidential primaries. It is about ensuring that we are electing candidates that have a vision for our country and, frankly, are equipped to fight in this politically toxic and racially divisive time.
Before I hear from you, Ron Fine and Latasha Brown, let me bring on Chaparral. Chaparral, your final thought, since you were like a super panelist today.
Yeah, my final thought today is that I'm actually demanding Tom Perez resign. I mean, I think that this is a huge deal, what's happening in the Democratic Party, and I think that it's just setting us up to lose. And I don't quite understand because I think about how he allowed Bloomberg to buy his way into this campaign. He changed the rules for some dollars. It's just all corrupt to me. Nobody's really talking about that. And I think that they're trying to tell us what we don't want. I know I want a progressive candidate. Don't tell me I don't want a progressive candidate. I absolutely do. And they're trying to force people down our throats. And I'm not going to stand for it. I'm so upset about it, and for Biden. I think the Democratic Party has basically slowly cutting the strings from under him, and he's going to be out in probably the next month or so, in my opinion. I just don't think that he has the gusto to go the long way.
Well, the third time has not been the charm for him. I mean, I never understood why he ran in the first place, but he's still in there because by denying the person who I think won last night the opportunity to give a speech outlining his Bernie's or his vision, and allowing Buttigieg to jump in the front. I felt that was just awful. And I have to tell you, Frank Watkins, I have felt this. I've seen this before. I saw how Reverend Jackson, and you're right, 30 years later, I'm still salty about it. Because, and I'm not talking about my father, I'm talking about these nameless, faceless people who had him run. These nameless, faceless people who have pinned their hopes, their dreams, and their lack of money on Bernie today and on Elizabeth Warren today. I mean, on these people who cannot go to the emergency room, who are watching a public school system be collapsed. I mean, Ron, fine. This is what an insult it is to Americans and to people of goodwill who need relief. And it's as if all of these people are tone deaf. They're not listening to anybody who's out here hurting.
When they were caucusing, when Amy Klobuchar didn't get enough to proceed to the next session, They went to peace. I was like, now how do women not support another woman? I said, here we go again with the lack of white women support for a white woman candidate. I don't understand. I understand, but I'm just like floored that women are not supporting women, and that nobody's talking about that part of it either.
You want to talk about that tomorrow? Okay.
That the white women problem is the reason why we got Trump in the first place. I am not taking the lead as a black person saying black people didn't get out and vote. No, if white women would have voted their interest, we would have Hillary Clinton, and we would not be sitting up here talking about how can we get rid of Trump. This is something that the DNC needs to also address.
Well, no, hold on, Chaparral, because I want Glenda and Latasha to jump in here because they're still here. Because Latasha and I are sister friends, and we talk about these things offline all the time. I don't generally divulge personal conversations, but this is political, and we talk about this a lot, Latasha. Hello. And Latasha and Glenda, we need to have this conversation on the air, and I think that we need to bring white women in on the conversation, lovingly, compassionately, and honestly and earnestly, because it is. Because we have some problems here. What was it? 11 to 13% of black men voted against Stacey Abrams. 14% of black men voted for Donald Trump, and then more than 50% of white women voted for Donald Trump. They vote. Wait, oh, I'm just trying to figure out how you all, how we can, what? Help me.
Liberation. Well, I think one, Chaparral is on I hear her, I feel her passion. I think that right there is what's going to transform America.
Yeah.
Like that passion we have, we who believe in freedom shall not rest until it comes. That ultimately this is a moment, and I really say this, and I say to the women, and that's why I applaud the work that Glenda is doing, that this is the moment that women have to rise up and take leadership and really demand something different. And so part of what we are seeing this issue around who voted for Trump. 53% of white women voted for Trump, but let's be honest, that we know traditionally that there is an issue, the big pink elephant in the room, or I'm going to say the big elephant in the room is that we have failed as a country to deal with race. And so even in the midst of the major gender and sexism issues that we have in this country, we have this twin sin of race, and that has also driven and impacted how white women have shown up to the polls. And so I think that we are in this particular moment. I do think that there's a particular kind of energy that women are stepping into, and so I actually see some possibilities. There's a light in the tunnel, and I particularly I am really amazed at seeing the leadership of women and women of color who are stepping into these spaces, and women in general stepping into these spaces and talking about what it is that we need to move forward. So I really want to have that conversation, not just on what that group of white women who consistently follow their husbands and follow the interests of what I call white interests, but there is enough of us, and there are more of us that literally are in alignment around shifting this country, that we've got the power to shift this country. And that's the conversation that I want to really be a part of and push, because that's what we're seeing. We're seeing all of these tricks happen, not because we're seeing Trump show up and others show up the way they're showing up, and the voter suppression, not because we're losing, we're winning. That the truth of the matter is the majority of this country wants to see something different. The majority of this country are frustrated with the economic structure in this country of going to work every day and can't pay their bills, or going to work every day, working 2 and 3 jobs and not able to afford their rent. The majority of this country are frustrated with high and increasing medical costs. And so I think part of what has to happen, and what we're seeing, anytime that there's a transition in power, you're going to see struggle. And I see part of the chaos that we're seeing right now, part of it is that the white men of power who have been used to having power, unchallenged and unchecked, are losing their minds. And what we're seeing candidates, women of color and progressive candidates, we're seeing the rise of candidates like Stacey Abrams to to run for governor in the state of Georgia and get the Democratic nomination. First time a black woman has ever done that in the history of this country, who came up against a white male, the traditional white male candidate that he had to resort to stealing because he couldn't beat her outright. We're seeing the same thing with Elizabeth Warren, that folks that you keep hearing this piece in the media saying, oh, well, women can't win. We're the majority of the country. Women can win, right? And so ultimately, when we're hearing kind of this these messages and we're seeing all of these tricks, part of this is that people see what is inevitable and what is coming. A change is coming. I'm not saying Cook. A change is coming. I think that we have to determine. We're determining how fast that change will come, and we're determining what that change will look like. But ultimately, young people are not connected to the parties or loyal to the parties in the same way. When I speak to my nieces and others, and including my generation, we don't have a loyalty to a particular kind of party. We really want to see something different. And so in this process, which is very chaotic and appearing chaotic, and part of that is intentional by those who are in power, those that even have been in power in both parties, and want things to maintain the same so there'll be a few people at the top that maintain power. I can talk about an election was stolen from myself, that I actually had to sue people and take them to the Supreme Court in my state. I can talk about how that election was stolen from me within the leadership of my own political party. So I raise this because I think that there is a larger question around this reframing and reimagining of America and democracy. And I think women, we're seeing the leadership of like AOC and Ayanna Pressley and others that are rising up. The leadership to save this country is unequivocally, in my mind, it is going to be women.
I'm amen to that. Ron Fine, and Ron has to come by. Oh, well, okay. Frank Watkins, please.
Yeah, I'd like to second everything Latasha said, and there would be no more appropriate time than 2020, which is the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment for women, to come out in record numbers and take more leadership roles in this country.
Amen to that. Ron Fine, you've been with us today, and I just thank you. You've gotten an earful, but you've given us an earful too. The Constitution demands it. You make a case for impeachment, for the impeachment of Donald Trump, but the Constitution demands that. But the Constitution, I think our citizenship demands much more of us. I think more than we even know. If we're going to be citizens of a republic and not subject of a monarchy, I think we're going to have to make a shift in our thinking, right?
I think that's right. And, we've only really had a democracy since about 1965.
Yes,
and
yes,
it's more
yes.
fragile than a lot of Americans think. And, Trump might lose the November 2020 election, but decide he's going to stay in office anyway. And, the Iowa debacle looks like it was incompetence, not sabotage or malicious hacking. But we may see more failures like it over the course of this year, and it may not be so clear. We've learned from other countries that when there's chaos, especially when the opposition is in chaos, then authoritarian leaders and strongmen step into the gap and say, I can bring order and stability. And Trump will take advantage of any chaos. He will not stay within the bounds of the law and the Constitution. He'll do whatever he can get away with. And the Senate is about to tell us that Trump can get away with anything. The Constitution is what keeps us together, but in the end, it's just a piece of paper if we don't fight for it. So people need to be ready to come to the polling place and vote, certainly, but democracy demands more than that. We also need to be ready to take to the streets.
Frank Watkins, do you want to say anything else? Latasha?
No, you had a lot of really great guests on this morning, and I can't say I would take issue with anything any of them have said. I think they were all right on point.
Well, all of you have been such blessings today, all of you, and I want to thank you. I don't generally have this many people on the air, but as I was reaching out to people, and all of you said yes at different times. I just said, let me go with this because I don't see Ron Fine enough. I don't hear from him enough, and heaven knows we need to, because there's so much that you have to say that would really help to set our thinking right and to really make us a better people. Because we are an American people with all of our ethnic and racial designations. We're one people. We really are. Reverend Frank Watkins, people need to know the history that you have lived, that you have made. And I want people to hear more of you. Latasha Brown, the history that you are making, and all of the inspiration that you give to people. You are such, all of you are such inspirations. You're so great. I just want to thank you. And Chaparral, I'm so glad that God is using you in such a magnificent way. For those of you, Reverend Watkins and Ron Fine and Latasha Brown, I met Chaparral when I had a radio show a little more than 10 years ago on another station. What a blessing she's been. In that time, though, she's lost a son. We don't quite know what happened. We do know that it was violent. We do know that it took her almost a year to get the tapes from the police as they watched him expire. And somehow or another, she has found the strength, and I know it's from God, to press forth and really become an even greater activist than you were before, Chaparral. And we just thank God for you and for your push and for your for your zeal for living and for us the living. Thank you. And I thank all of you today. May God bless you all. And everybody, we will be watching the State of the Union tonight. Because I need to get my popcorn. I don't know what the president's going to do. I think he is going to really, I tell you, he's going to be, he's unleashed. He's unleashed. So we'll see. We'll see. But you should be unleashed. Get out and vote. Get registered to vote. Call 1-866-OUR-VOTE, 1-866-OUR-VOTE. Find out if you've been purged. Find out if you're still registered. Go to vote.org and you do the same. Everybody, God bless you. God bless you, Reverend Frank Watkins, Ron Fine. Everybody, you got to get his book. The Constitution Demands It, the case for the impeachment of Donald Trump. Latasha Brown, Black Voters Matter. We love you all. Thank you so much. And Harvard's gang, you got to get out of Cambridge, girl, and come on back going down to these parts. Now, enough of that. Even though she will be going back, and we're very excited that they have her up there. And you know what? You already have a class, something. You already have something to study. This hashtag hot mess, hashtag hot mess Iowa. How about that? I love you all. I love you, everybody. God bless you. Have a great day. I'll talk to you tomorrow, everybody, here on the Santita Jackson.